Record. All right. And we'll let
Good
you take
morning.
it
Good
away.
morning, everyone. It is so nice to have everybody here together this Saturday morning, October 16th. We're so excited to be here as part of this wonderful, indispensable conversation that we're going to have this morning. My husband,
Rafael, that's my cue, my cue.
My husband and I, Alexi, are just so happy to invite you all here. We have the great pleasure of having known Ryan for about 6 years. Ryan Wolf is the president and executive director of Ability Ministry. And he just has a passion for God's people, and he has a passion to share to share information that helps equip churches to reach the disability community for Christ, which is awesome. We also have had very many opportunities to counsel with Ryan about our own ministry that we are running. He's just been a great friend and a great encourager in our walk. He comes also with 15 years of experience in ministry. He was a pastor, a disability ministry pastor at the First Christian Church in Ohio. He also comes to us as a Shine On partner. Just to give you a little bit of background about that, Tim Tebow Foundation, which is here in Florida, they launched several years ago a one-night event around Valentine's Day called Night to Shine, which encourages churches to create an event, kind of like a prom-like event, to invite people with disabilities from the community to have a fun night of just enjoyment, laughter, music, food, just fun time together. And it has been very successful. It is an international event. Many churches across South Florida participate. And what they decided to do after years of having that event is they decided to also create a new program, a partner program with that event called Shine On. And that is to invite several different organizations who provide different services to come on as Shine On partners, to provide resources to churches who take on that Night to Shine event. So Ability Ministry has just been chosen as a Shine On partner. So for anybody who's joining us who also does that event, you really want to be able to connect with Ryan and talk a little bit about the resources that Ability Ministry can offer you in your church. We are very excited. We're looking forward to a dynamic conversation this morning, and we're just so excited that Ryan is here. So without further ado,
take it away, Ryan.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for that introduction. And before we get started, I just want to say a special thank you to the Perez family and the Accord Disability Ministry there in South Florida. They do an amazing job in their community. And without them, this wouldn't have come together. So also thank you to Javier Jimenez and My Accessible Church for helping to promote and connect people to this event. Elizabeth Sotolongo for help as well in making this happen. So thank you to everybody that's played a part in this gathering. So let's just jump right in to this conversation as we talk about what makes a church an indispensable church. All right. So as we get going here, let me see here. All right. So let me ask you this question. What makes your church different than any other church out there? What makes you stand out? What would make somebody from your community want to choose your church over the 9 other churches in your area? Because I think one thing that we all recognize is that Every church has got a lead pastor. Every church has got a worship band. Every church has got uh, a youth pastor, a children's pastor. At least most churches do. And as you're looking kind of across the menu of options, why would a church choose you over the 9 other churches in your community? What makes you different? You don't have to answer that question, but I want you to think about that. If somebody was looking you guys up online versus somebody else, why would a family choose you over someone else? I'd like to say that if you become an indispensable church, as the Apostle Paul talks about, and we'll get into that in just a minute, I believe that your church will stand out amongst the other churches. Now, there's a reason that there are 9 churches that are all kind of blah, and they all kind of look the same, and there's one that kind of shines amongst the others, and that's because 9 out of 10 churches, or more than 9 out of 10 churches in your area, have no disability ministry programming or outreach or intentions. Um, Less than 10% churches do anything for their disability community or make that a focus of their church. So if you want to stand out amongst the other churches in your community, if you want to make a difference, this is a great way to be able to shine a light in your community, to be attractive to a group of people that desperately needs Jesus. So I'm glad that you have decided to join us today. And for those that will be watching the recording later, I'm glad that you're watching this, as you will find out exactly how you can be different. And that's a good thing than all the other churches in your community, as you can seek to bring hope to your community. Again, thank you for the introduction. I won't go into great detail about myself, since you've given me a good introduction. I do want to tell you a little bit about Ability Ministry. Ability Ministry, believe it or not, has been around for over 35 years. The picture that you're looking at right now is the construction of our original home that was built in Louisville, Tennessee. Our ministry started as a residential ministry for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities over 35 years ago. One of the other things that we've added in addition to our residential ministry is our equipping, training, and evangelism side of our organization, where we help churches establish a disability ministry or advance their current disability ministry. So in a field, disability ministry is very much an emerging field of ministry that many people haven't discovered yet. So in this emerging field of ministry, we are very proud of the fact that we've been doing disability ministry for over 35 years. We've seen just about everything that we feel like you'll probably encounter, and we can be a great help to you and to your churches. I also want to let you guys know, as we've been around for a long time, we truly do have a worldwide reach. Our materials are being used in about 40 different states currently in the United States, and about 20 different countries around the world are using the materials that we provide for churches to do disability ministry. And one of the things, again, that we are very proud about is about 90% or more of the materials that we provide for churches are available for free on our website at abilityministry.com. So make sure you come check us out online and see all the different things that we have available for you for free to use. The Perez family mentioned that we are a Shine On contributor, which means that we provide content for the Tim Tebow Foundation to use to help churches do disability ministry more than just one night a year. That's one thing that they noticed really quickly in their Night to Shine proms is it's a great ministry where families feel welcomed one night a year. But one of the things that they did find out is that some of these families that came to Night to Shine proms in February every year would start showing up at the churches. Imagine that, right? You do this amazing outreach event for your community. People come, they love it, they feel loved, they feel welcome, they feel sense of belonging in God's family and a church. And then they show up on a Sunday morning after the prom, and they find that the church has nothing for them, and all of a sudden they feel like they're out of place. They feel like they're not welcomed, and it was a very uh, kind of jolting experience for families. So that's why they've decided to develop this Shine On initiative, where they help to equip churches to do disability ministry every week during the year instead of just one night a year. So we're excited to be a partner in that, to provide them content and trainings. So a lot of the stuff that you'll see on our website is also available on their website. So we help to equip the Tim Tebow Foundation to equip churches. So we're excited to be a partner and working with many of the Night to Shine churches in your area already. All right, so let's get into this conversation here. All right, as you see a picture of the world, I wonder if you know how many people in the world live with a disability. If anybody wants to shout out, maybe unmute and give a guess to how many people live with a disability. If you want to jump on and share that now, go ahead. See how many disability scholars we have here. Who wants to give a guess?
About a little, probably more than 20%, a little more than 20%, or about 20%.
About 20%. Okay. All right. Who wants to give it a number? Give it a number. 20% of the world's population.
Jonathan Gomez in the chat, 10 million.
10 million. Okay. All right. Let's go a little bit higher than 10 million. All right. Who else? One more guess. Between 10 million and 20%, I'm going to say Javier's a lot closer. Let's put it that way. One more guess here. How many people in the world live with disability? All right, looks we got another entry in the chat. A couple more. All right, we got 1.2 billion, or looks like 100 million. All right, the 1.2 billion is going to be our winner today for sure. It's estimated that at least 1 billion people in the world live with a disability. I've seen recent statistics that say it's actually closer to 1.5 billion people in the world live with the disability. So that's like an overwhelming number. And sometimes it's hard to kind of conceptualize how many 1 billion is. So if you were to take every single person that lives in North America and South America, you would get about 1 billion people. So as you're trying to visualize how many people live with disability, this gives you a pretty good picture of how many people in the world live with a disability. So I want you to kind of see this, and I want that to kind of sink in, because I want you to understand that the disability community is everywhere. Okay, it's in every community. The disability community, if we understand that it's 1.5 billion people, it would make up the largest unreached people group in the entire world. And the beauty of it all is you don't have to travel 3,000 miles over an ocean to go reach your disability community for Christ, because in your community, people with disabilities are living there, and they desire to be a part of God's family, and you have an opportunity to reach that mission field that exists in your backyard. So let's take this really big number, which is 1 to 1.5 billion, and let's try to kind of narrow the focus to help you see really what this looks like. So you've got 28 billion. All right, let's try to make this number a little bit smaller. 28,228,599. Anybody have a guess what this number represents? All right, obviously much smaller than the 1 to 1.5 billion. All right, any guesses? You can go ahead and unmute and just shout it out if you want. Any guesses?
The number of disabled people in the US.
You got it. There it is. United States of America. Under the current census numbers, this, let me give a little clarifying statement here. Thank you, Samantha. That was great. This is the number of people under the age of 65 that have reported that they live with a disability. Now, this is an important distinction, and all the rest of the numbers that you'll see here over the next several minutes are census numbers that are readily available to you of people under the age of 65 that live with a disability, that have reported living with a disability through census numbers. So what that tells you is these are people that aren't disabled or don't have a disability due to aging. That's the age of 65 is definitely a marker that we recognize that once people kind of move past that threshold, that, you know, if you live long enough, you're probably going to experience disability as a result of aging. So these are numbers of people that have not either been born with or acquired a disability in a lifetime under the age of 65. So we know that the numbers are much, much larger than this, but this is what the census would tell us. So 28,228,599 people under the age of 65 in the United States live with a disability. All right, let's zone in a little bit more. How about 1,847,085 people living in the state of Florida with a disability under the age of 65. So again, if you factor in the people above 65 and the people who've chosen not to report that they have a disability, you're probably looking at a much larger number, maybe even as high as 3 million people in the state of Florida that live with a disability. All right, now let's break this down county by county throughout your area. So if you are in one of these counties, what I would encourage you to do is take note of the number and begin to pray for this number, because this is a real and tangible number of people in your community that live with a disability that you have an opportunity to reach for Jesus. Remember, this is the largest unreached people group in the world that needs the message of Jesus. And many of them, because of their disabilities, have been isolated in their communities and aren't always welcomed into churches. So you have a great opportunity here. So Palm Beach County, under the age of 65, report 100,284 people with a disability. Broward County, 128,883 people live with a disability under the age of 65. Collier County, 20,785 people, again, under the age of 65 with a disability. Miami-Dade County, 157,583 people live with a disability. Monroe County, 4,825 people live with a disability. So these are real people in your community under the age of 65 that live with a disability, many of which are isolated in their own communities that aren't a part of churches. Some statistics that we have seen show that upwards of 80% of people living with disabilities are not a part of churches. So again, you have a huge opportunity to reach people for Jesus in your own community that no one else is reaching. Okay. How about Miami? All right. Just the city of Miami, 32,289 people live with a disability. So if you're in or around the city of Miami, you have a huge opportunity to reach people for Jesus. Not only you, but the other churches in your community. One thing that I want to make sure that you understand is that it's not any one job of any one church to reach everyone in the disability community for Jesus. It is an effort that must be championed by all churches in the area. So let's say that one church in Miami, it's this maybe your church, you're successful at reaching 1% of your disability community for Jesus. 1% of 32,289 is like 300 people. So if you are 99% ineffective and you're only 1% effective at reaching your disability community for Jesus, you're bringing 300 people into the family of God, into your church. And if you had a 300 person jump in attendance because they start coming to your church, that would be considered a wild success, even though you've only reached 1% of the 32,289 people in your own community. So what I want you to see is that this is a huge opportunity. It's more than just a church growth strategy. Obviously, it's a kingdom opportunity where we have an opportunity to bring people that are isolated in your community into the body of Christ by inviting them into your local church and having them find a place of belonging. As I mentioned before, this is the largest unreached people group, the disability community, and they are in your backyard. And 90% plus of churches in your area have no disability ministry programming or outreach. So what I mean by that is you don't have an event at your church like a night to shine. You don't have a respite program for families. You don't have a class for adults. You don't have a buddy system for children. You don't have anything. So if you have something, if you have even one of those things, you will have the opportunity to be a light to the world around you. I love what Matthew 5:14 says. It says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden." This is very much the case for churches that decide to be a part of this disability ministry movement, because instantly you stand out amongst the, if there's 10 churches in your community, if we believe the statistics, you become the one church that is different than everybody else, and you have an opportunity to invite people to your community that no one else is inviting or reaching out to. This verse also, I believe, applies to this ministry more than almost any other verse in the Bible. When we look at Luke 10:2, it says, "The harvest is huge, but the workers are few. So ask the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest field." And obviously, this is Jesus speaking here, but you think about the disability community being the largest unreached people group in the world, the harvest is huge. And then you think about the fact that 9 out of 10 churches don't do anything to reach their disability community intentionally. The workers truly are few. So this is a great opportunity for you to have an impact and to make a difference in your community. So I hope that you will seize this opportunity and be a light to your community. And again, it's so much more than just a church growth strategy. It's a kingdom opportunity. So let me share with you a couple more statistics, and then I'm going to run through a couple scriptures for you. And then, like I promised, we will leave time at the end for some questions and answers. Okay. Some churches will turn around and say, if it's such a huge opportunity, if disability is everywhere, why don't I see people with disabilities in my congregation? Some people will argue with us when we reach out and encourage them to start some form of disability ministry at their church, and they'll say, well, we don't need to because we don't have anybody with disabilities in our church. What I would like to do is point to the CDC's most current statistics, and these came out in 2020, so these are very current. The CDC reports that 1 in 4 adults in America live with a disability. Exactly 26% of our adult population in the United States live with a disability. So as a church leader, You may look out at your congregation and you might say, well, I don't see anybody with disabilities. Do we really need this? 1 in 4 adults. So if you're a church of 1,000 people, 250, assuming that everybody would be adults, so you've got at least 250 people in your congregation that live with a disability. But again, you might come back and say, well, where are they? I don't see them. This is another statistic that's really important for you to understand. 80% of all disabilities cannot be seen by the naked eye. All right. You can't always look at someone and immediately know that they live with a disability. It's pretty easy, to spot somebody that maybe has Down syndrome or that comes into your church using a wheelchair. But if someone comes in to your church with autism, you may not be able to tell just by looking at them. Behaviorally, you might be able to identify the fact that they have autism. But another thing that you can't always easily see is when someone has different mental health issues that can be very disabling. You can't always see that. So 80% of people with disabilities, you can't tell just by looking at them. So it's important to get to know your people, because in your congregation, you have plenty of people already that live with disabilities, and even more so in your community. The world believes that disability is ugly, it's shameful, should be hidden away. Some would even go as far as to say that disability is a punishment from God, and that's why it exists. There are so many reasons, either consciously or subconsciously, why churches don't reach out to their disability communities. I'd like to believe that the vast majority of churches don't do it because they don't think about it. Oftentimes, disability is, again, something you don't see easily, and many people that live with disabilities are hidden away in their communities or are isolated. So a lot of churches just don't think about it because, again, they don't see it. But there are a lot of negative narratives that exist in our world about disability. And some of these narratives even exist within churches that stop churches from reaching out to their disability communities. But what I love about our God is that he doesn't believe that disability is ugly. It's not shameful. It's definitely not a punishment from him. Jesus speaks about this directly and about the purpose of disability. So I want to share with you a scripture that I think is just so foundational when it comes to disability ministry, and that's John chapter 9, verses 1 through 3. So let's look at that real briefly this morning. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. Now it says he, because only Jesus sees him at first. The disciples don't see him, but obviously Jesus points him out, and the disciples come back and ask him this question: Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So we see the theology and the worldview of the disciples is that disability is a negative, because they believe it's a punishment from God. They believe that disability exists as a result of sin. And what I love is that Jesus does what only Jesus can do, is in one sentence, in verse 3, he corrects their theology that's wrong. He corrects their worldview that is wrong. He essentially gives a sermon in one sentence. I think we would all love it if we could go to church and we just get hit with a one sentence sermon that completely rocks our world and changes our theology and worldview. That's what Jesus does for his disciples in John 9:3, when he says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. Jesus says very, very clearly here that disability is not a punishment from God. It is not something that is shameful. It is not something that needs to be hidden away. It's not something that we should have pity on people. Jesus says that disability is a divine opportunity for the power and the works of God to be displayed in someone's life. Imagine if we all embraced that and believed that. Would not our world be a much better place? Would not our churches be a much better place? So Jesus, again, changes the worldview and the theology of the disciples in one sentence. Now, the world, again, because the world's upside down and backwards and messed up, I think we can all agree on that. The world also does not believe that people with disabilities are worth pursuing. All right, because again, the narrative negative and the negative narratives that exist surrounding disability, they would say, people with disabilities, they're second-rate citizens, they're less than human, and we have seen the horror that has happened to people with disabilities over the years because of the beliefs. But again, Jesus, God, doesn't see it that way. Jesus himself commanded the religious leaders, these would be the church leaders, these would be the pastors of churches back in Jesus's day, the religious leaders of his day, to actually prioritize reaching the disability community and bringing people into his family. This can be found in the book of Luke, the 14th chapter. Jesus, on 3 different occasions in this same chapter, in 3 different ways, commands the religious leaders of his day to reach the disability community for Christ. We'll focus on only one verse from this chapter, but I would encourage you all to read the entire chapter. This is the parable of the great banquet. The master of the banquet, which we know to be God, says to his servants, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Obviously, I'm striking out some of those words because we don't always see those words as being politically correct. And I would just make this the Ryan Wolf translation and say, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the town and bring in all who are poor and disabled. This is a very short guest list that God gives his servants, which would be us. This is God speaking directly to us as the religious leaders of our day. And he says, go out quickly into the streets and the alleys and bring into my family, the church, all who are poor and all who are disabled. It's interesting that in Jesus's day, the location of the poor and the disabled were the streets and the alleys. They were homeless. They were discarded by their society. Now, many people in our community probably aren't homeless. Some are, but the disabled in our community, though not homeless, are isolated from everyone else in their communities. And it does take an effort for us to leave our comfortable church buildings and to go out into our communities and to find those who are disabled and say, you are welcome. More than you are welcome, you are wanted in our church bodies. So I find this interesting that this is a direct command from the lips of Jesus in this chapter of Luke. And churches, again, 9 out of 10 churches are not obedient to Jesus in this command. If simply you don't believe anything else about reaching the disability community for Christ, if you simply seek to be obedient to Jesus, you will be responsive to this call, and you will say, yes, we must do something for our disability community because we want to be obedient to Jesus. All right. And then the Apostle Paul, this is where we get the word indispensable. This is why we believe this is such an important word. When talking about the body of Christ in 1 Corinthians 12:22, he says, on the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. All right. Now we know the word indispensable means things that we cannot do without, things that are absolutely necessary. So the Apostle Paul himself says those parts of the body that seem to be weaker, what fits that description better than anything else? When you think about people in our society, people with disabilities are viewed as weak. Uh, there's no getting around that. The people group that fits that description better than any other description is people with disabilities, maybe children as well. The Apostle Paul says that if your church, the body of Christ, does not have people with disabilities in it, your church is missing body parts. If your church is missing body parts, your church is not functioning at an optimal level. Without proper representation and complete representation in the body of Christ, the local church, your church won't function the way that God wants it to. So you must have people with disabilities in your church, a part of your local body of Christ, if you want to function at an optimal level. These are people you cannot do without, though 90% of churches typically don't have that as an intentional outreach. So as we begin to kind of turn the corner here, I want to leave you with some practical things that you can do. All right. I hope that I've presented the case for you as to why you should be interested in being obedient to Jesus and reaching the largest unreached people group that lives isolated in your own community. I hope that I've presented that case well enough. But now let me tell you a few things that you can do. All right. First, let's talk about maybe 4 or 5 different next steps that you can take. First, we want you to build a solid foundation. I've shared with you today maybe 3 or 4 different scriptures that pertain to disability in the Bible, but we want you to dig in deeper. If you want to build a solid foundation, ask yourself, what does the Bible really say about disability? Because God's not silent on the subject. And if we want to be obedient to Jesus, we should kind of build a firm foundation built on truth. And we've got a resource for you called What Does the Bible Really Say About Disability? It's a free resource that I would encourage you to look at. So build a firm foundation on the truth that we can find in the Bible. Second, you should start with who you have. Like I mentioned before, people with disabilities are already in your congregation. They are a distinct people group that you can be very intentional with. I think that churches that do men's ministry, or they do women's ministry, or they do children's ministry, they're very specific and targeted groups. There's reasons why we do specific and targeted things with different people groups, because they're needed. All right. If you, as a church leader, found out that 26% of your congregation had a gambling problem, had a drinking problem, I think that you'd probably address that, and that you would start some form of group or outreach or intentional programming for them, because you want to build your people up and help them. So disability ministry really should be no different. There are people in your congregation. It's just a matter of you identifying who they are and then developing programming for them to help them, and we can help you with that. We have resources for that. Another thing that you can do as you're taking kind of some next steps or some first steps is to study your own campus. We have what we call a church accessibility checklist that you can walk through your campus, and you can see with maybe a new set of eyes if your church campus is really accessible or not. So that's an important thing, because you never get that second chance to make a first impression. Because if people come into your church campus or your church building and things aren't as accessible as they need to be, they may feel like they aren't important, they aren't necessary, they aren't welcome. So you don't want that to happen. The fourth thing that you can do is to get to know your community. Again, you have people in your congregation, but you have vastly more in your community that are isolated that need to be a part of your church. So you need to get to know who they are and where they are. And we have some great tools to help you do that at Ability Ministry. Number 5, be a blessing, no strings attached. Sometimes, again, that looks like being a church that might host a Night to Shine prom. That might be a church that hosts a respite event for parents. That might be a church that just goes out into the disability community and works with Special Olympics or a day program in your community. There's so many different ways that you can be a blessing in your community, no strings attached, as you kind of introduce yourself to your community to say, hey, not only are we here, but we care about you. So these are some practical things that you can do as a church. Again, we have some free resources. There's 3 of them on our website, abilityministry.com. Specifically, you can find them on our one-page documents page. The first one being, what does the Bible really say about disability, as we highlight some of the key scriptures. Second resource there is the online church campus accessibility checklist. I'm sorry, the church campus accessibility checklist. And the third one that you see there is a first steps document that gives you 8 practical steps on getting a disability ministry started. One thing that you will get as being a part of this conversation today, or by tuning into it later, is we have a resource page that we will send you in addition to the link to the recording for this conversation today. So again, I've thrown a lot at you today. I want you to understand you are not alone. All right. We at Ability Ministry are here to help you. One of the things that we do for churches, because we are passionate about churches starting or advancing their disability ministry efforts, is that we offer free consultation. So we would encourage you to continue the conversation that we've started today with us. And you can do that by going to abilityministry.com/consulting. And you can request a free consultation with us where we can continue this conversation and help you to take some first steps or some next steps. Every church in every community is a little bit different. There is no one cookie cutter approach to starting or advancing a disability ministry. That's why we like to kind of walk through some steps with you to help you identify some good first steps or next steps. Another thing I would encourage you to do is to connect with a local ministry. There are some in your community. They're not a ton, but the Accord Ministry, the Perez family that's on this call today, Javier Jimenez with My Accessible Church, there are some really good communities that you can kind of lean on because, like I said, it's no one church's job to reach everybody in the disability community. It is a collective effort. We need every church to do something to be able to reach the massive numbers that exist in your community. So at that point, I would like to kind of pause and ask if you have any questions. I'll take some questions here at this point. If you have any here. If not, again, we have a resource page for you that will be helpful in taking some first steps or next steps, and we'll make the recording available. So thank you for being very good listeners. I know that was a lot to digest there in about 45 minutes.
So Ryan, this is Jonathan. Thanks again for taking the time. I just was curious, as far as the reaching the disabled community. I think it's this, you're trying to kind of meeting 2 worlds, right? How have you seen it done successfully, and what do you think are like the biggest obstacles towards getting, I guess, church-wide adoption for like presenting a kind of like a disabled outreach? How do you see that? Or how have you seen it done successfully?
That's a great question, Pastor Gomez, and thank you for jumping on there. There's a couple different ways I want to approach answering this question. First, I'd like to say that we have seen this be successful in churches as small as 20 people and as large as 25,000 people. There's a church in one of the kind of outskirts of Texas of literally 20 people. that again, disability ministry is different in every community and context. So you kind of have to get to know who you've got and who's in your community. They identified that there were a lot of people in their community that were, this being the church, small church in Texas, that were attending essentially a workshop in their community. And so what they started doing was a small group for adults that meets in the evenings, because they identified this large group of adults with disabilities in their community, and they provided busing for it, because essentially nobody had transportation in their community. So it can work in the smallest of churches, it can work in the largest of churches. Probably our biggest supporter is a church in Louisville, Kentucky, probably around 25,000 people, and they do everything that you can imagine a church doing in disability ministry. So what I want you to understand is that church size and church location have no deterrent on the effectiveness of a church making an impact in their disability community. The one thing that can deter a church in their success, or could stifle a church's success, is the level of leadership buy-in. The probably greatest determining factor of how successful you'll be in reaching your disability community for Christ is how much your leadership buys into this as a legitimate ministry. So you being on this call is like a big deal, because you are identifying this as, this is legitimate, this is worth talking about, this is worth looking into. So in order for churches at the leadership level to buy in, we always encourage them, hey, let's just start what the Bible said, looking at what the Bible says about disability. And that's why that document, what does the Bible really say about disability, is so important, because God's not silent on the topic. And it's not really one of these ministries that is an elective type ministry where you can choose to do it or you can choose not to do it. This is a mandate. This is a command from the lips of Jesus. You see this over and over in that chapter of Luke 14. So it's so important for churches at the leadership level to buy in. And then from there, it's like anything else you would do as a church leader. If you believe in it, your congregation will get on board. So once the leadership level buys in and begins to speak about it, if the church leaders buy into it, they're going to talk about it from the stage. You're going to share videos. We have all kinds of awareness videos that we've already created for churches to use for free that are available on our videos page. So there's so many things that you can do to just start to get your congregations to kind of wrap their head around it. Because again, so much of disability is not that people want or choose to be disobedient. It's just out of sight, out of mind. So it's a conversation that churches must start to have, and that starts from the top. You can have some pretty passionate parents that want to start and advance a ministry, but they'll only get so far if not for staff level, leadership level buy-in. So I hope that kind of answers your question, kind of attacking it from a couple different angles, but great question. Yeah, don't let your circumstances stifle you. Lead up. If you are a volunteer, a parent, lead up and help your pastor or pastors to see kind of what God has been saying from the beginning of time about the importance of disability in our lives and in our churches and communities. Any other questions?
Hey, Ryan, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks, Debbie.
Our church has an immediate need right now to establish a buddy system for some of our young autism spectrum kids. Mm-hmm. And I am a parent of an older spectrum kid, so they've asked me if I would help out. But I'm emotionally drained and I don't want to help out. When I come to church, it's my downtime. And to chase a 3-year-old when I'm dealing with a 16-year-old that's dysregulated at home just does not, I'm just exhausted. So how can I point them? I mean, we can get people to be buddies, but how do we train them to, I mean, they have some behavior issues and people don't really know what to do and how to handle it. What would you recommend?
First of all, thank you for being a mom, being an advocate. I think that's awesome, and that's what more churches need is people like you that say, this is a need. Please help. I need this. We need more people to stand up and be a voice not only for the children but for all the other kids that exist. As far as buddy system and helping people be successful, I'm a child of the 80s, so I grew up loving the cartoon G.I. Joe. At the end of every G.I. Joe episode, they would have like the PSA, the public service announcement, and they would always end by saying, "Knowing is half the battle." And I believe that this is so much the case when it comes to having success in a buddy type situation. If you have the information, you can be successful. So what I mean by that, having the information, one of the things that we've developed for churches is a child information sheet. This is another thing that's on our website at abilityministry.com on our one-page documents page. The child information sheet is something that you can do in addition to your typical registration that you do maybe in children's ministry or student ministry, that ask the questions, right, that help you to be successful when working one-on-one with a child, to help you to know what are the things that this child enjoys, what are some of the things that might be triggers for this child so you can avoid it, and what are some of the things that can help this child de-escalate once escalation starts. So you've got all these answers to questions that you need. So again, this is another free resource that's available on our website. But if you have a folder of child info sheets that give you all the answers to the questions that you need, and that's present with you in your disability ministry or your children's ministry space or your youth ministry space, so you've got a buddy that signs up to help with your child that morning, they get to see this sheet. They can carry the sheet around with them if they want. So they, again, have the answers to the questions that they need. So that's just one tool that we have. If you're interested in having a further conversation, again, so much of this is more of a one-on-one type of situation. We have a great ministry leader in California that runs ministry with children and a buddy system that I can connect you with that can help you with training pieces specific to that. So yeah, definitely check out our website, fill out a consultation. I can get you connected with a ministry leader that does a buddy system every single week that can kind of walk you along that path. Great question, Debbie. Other questions? We've got about 3 minutes left. I want to kind of stay true to time here.
Ryan, I'd like to also offer encouragement to those who are on, who, you use the verse, the harvest is plenty, but the workers are few. But there are some people on who have been the workers, and they have been in this for a while, and they do have hearts for the disability community. And, sometimes it's hard. It can become frustrating. It can seem difficult to champion something that, isn't being supported at a leadership level. And I just, want to end with some encouragement to those that are on as well, or who will be listening, who are in spaces where they might feel like the only one, right? Like Elijah, right? I'm the only one. And just some encouragement that you could offer as they persevere in this season, whether leadership, engages or hears them, or whether, they change their mind, and they do, but just some encouragement for them as they serve in their capacities.
Yeah. So some kind of closing thoughts, some encouragement. God has created you. God has gifted you. God has placed you in a very specific situation. We may not all be excited about maybe where we are placed in the kingdom, in the world, but God has given you an opportunity that only you can do. And I think when we view it as such, man, that's exciting to me. The fact that God is, God can do whatever he wants to do, right? Because he's God. But he chooses to use you. Even if you are worn out, even if you are tired, even if you don't think that you can make it one more day, God has chosen you to do something spectacular, not only for your child, if you're a parent, or not only for your community, if you're an advocate, um, but for the kingdom. Again, God can do whatever he wants, but he chooses to use you in your space where you may feel limited and insignificant. Don't believe the lies of Satan, because that's what Satan wants you to believe, is that you're limited and insignificant in the scheme of things. Believe in what God believes about you and the fact that he wants to use you. One last thing, kind of as we wrap up here, and this is a saying that I like to use with every church that I work with, is that disability ministry is a crock pot ministry. It's not a microwave ministry. It's a ministry that takes time, and that's okay, because you think about things that take time. When you're cooking them, stuff tastes better when it's not microwaved, right? And disability ministry is very much like that. It takes time to develop. It takes time to build trust. It takes time to do it right. It takes time for your community to realize that they're not, just a church growth scheme, that they actually are welcome and loved. So it's a long haul ministry that I believe that if you are faithful in seeing it through, God will bless your socks off, as long as you're faithful in seeing it through. So thank you so much for who you are, for what you are doing in your community. You can make such a difference if you're faithful, and God will help you to see it through. Also, one last thing before I kind of give some last ways of how to get a hold of me. Debbie, you asked a question about a buddy ministry. Javier, who's on this call, does and has trained and helped churches set up an autism buddy ministry. So Debbie, I'd encourage you to connect with Javier Jimenez. And if you're not familiar, you can find him online pretty easily, My Accessible Church. So make sure to connect with him. So kind of as we kind of wrap up here, our time together, I just want to give you a couple easy ways to get a hold of me. In our ministry, Ability Ministry. You can find us abilityministry.com. My email address is ryan@abilityministry.com. You can find us all over social media at Ability Ministry. So again, if you have questions, you want to continue the conversation, I would encourage you to open up a consultation request so we can further the conversation. Thank you for tuning in today, for those of you who are here live with us, and for those of you who will be joining us by watching this recording later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate you being a part of this today.